Hello, this video is entitled Preliminary Ideas. As such, it reflects some basic ideas about this particular course and about ethics in general that you've really got to take on board right away, really, before getting started in earnest on the course material. So the first thing to understand is that ethics is a part of philosophy. You'll notice that this particular course is labeled Philosophy 203. It's offered from the philosophy department, and the reason for that is because the study of ethics is a subset of philosophy as a whole. There are lots and lots and lots of things that philosophers do. One of the things that they do is ethics. And so the reason that ethics fits into philosophy is because of the kinds of questions that are addressed by the field of philosophy. So generally, there's no hard and fast rule. There's no specific finite list of things that are inside philosophy or not. But in general, the way to tell when something is philosophical or should fit into the field of philosophy is that something be both highly general and highly fundamental. Okay, so for example, a question is general, right, when it's about a larger class of things. So I've written here, for example, a question about dogs is more general than a question about my dog. Okay, the dogs in general are a wider class of things than my specific dog, right? A question about mammals is, of course, more general than a question about dogs. Again, those are wider categories. And so a question about everything, and there are some questions about everything. For example, the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Okay, that's about as general as a question can get. Okay. And so the more general a question is, the more likely that it's the kind of question that philosophers deal with. And some of the questions in ethics, of course, are highly general. The second feature of a philosophical question is that a philosophical question tends to be highly fundamental. So that means that something is more fundamental than another if the answer to more things depends on that, right? And so as I've written here, very little depends on the answer to the question, what was Seward thinking when he purchased Alaska? Of course, there are some interesting things in history that turn on that question, but really not very much, right? There's not very many other questions depend on the answer to that one. But if you compare the question, what is a good reason to believe something? Well, a whole bunch of answers depend for their answer on the answer to that question. And so again, when a question is very highly fundamental, that is, if you changed your mind about the answer to that question, you'd have to change your mind about a whole lot of things. Those are also the kinds of questions that fit into the field of philosophy. The world is full of highly general and highly fundamental questions, and they're not going away. And so they have to live somewhere, and philosophy is that place. And again, you'll notice as we go through this course that a great many questions in ethics are very highly general and very highly fundamental, which is the biggest reason why ethics is part of the field of philosophy. So let's talk about some of those questions in ethics, some of those highly fundamental and general questions, some of the things you'll be taking a look at over in this course. Include questions as fundamental and general as what is good? Right. Typically, in ethics, we narrow that question down a little bit. The question, what is good, is a little too broad even for us. And we'll say things like, what is the difference between different kinds of good? For example, the moral good, the good referring to what the right thing to do or the right way to be is, justice, right, the first virtue of institutions, and of course aesthetics, about sort of beauty and appeal to the senses, right? These are all very different kinds of good, but they are all kinds of the good, and so we can say something about each of those things and subdivide the question out even further. We can also ask, what is the best life? Right, this is one of the most basic questions of ethics. What is the right thing to do? A question we're going to be very much in conversation with, and more importantly, why? Right? Why is some particular thing the right thing to do, and why or why is something else? Of course, what is the right way to be, right? If you're asking a question about character instead of conduct, that is another way of thinking about the major question of ethics. And again, the most important question, why, right? Why is one way to be the right way and why are other ways wrong? And of course, then we've got all kinds of questions of applied ethics. Is capital punishment just? Is abortion morally permissible? What is the moral status of non-human animals? Again, these are all questions that depend for their answers on some of these more general, more fundamental questions earlier, but these are some of the questions we're going to be taking a look at in this course. Now, this question list divides itself up into several subcategories that will determine largely the way that we move in the course from beginning to end. Some of these very, very highly general and fundamental questions like what is good, what is the best life, what is the difference between different kinds of good, these are the questions of what we call meta-ethics, right? These are the big, large-scale questions that you've got to have some ideas about before you start asking what's the right thing to do. Before you start asking what's the right thing to do, you want to know what's good. You want to know what the best life is. You want to know the difference between various kinds of good. The answers to those questions will inform our answers to the later ones. Those later questions, that is, what is the right thing to do or what is the right way to be? This is the bulk of the course. This is most of what we're going to be taking a look at in this course. These are what we call the questions of normative ethics. Right? These are the questions that are aiming to tell us how to tell the difference between right and wrong and what's better and worse and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, the answer to those questions will help to inform the answers to more specific questions, these questions of applied ethics. And that's the branch of ethics that these questions are in. These are, again, questions of applied ethics. And we sort of have to go in that order because it goes from most fundamental to less fundamental. And so largely that's going to be the structure of the course. We're going to be taking a look at a few of these sort of large meta-ethical questions. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at questions in normative ethics, and then some time at the end talking about questions of applied ethics. And so while we're talking about questions, now it's time to talk a little bit about answers. And I just should say right at the beginning that ultimately we are never going to be certain of the answer to any but the most trivial questions. That's not just in ethics, that's just everywhere. Trivial questions are things like, are bachelors married? Okay, look, by definition, no. That's a very trivial question, and because it's so trivial, we can know the answer to it completely. How many angles does a triangle have? Again, we can know the answer to that one for absolute certain, but only because it's such a trivial question. Once you start getting into harder questions like, what's the best tax policy? Is the number of stars in the universe prime? What are the fundamental laws of physics? What happened at the Battle of Waterloo? Look, what does the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner actually mean? Right. So when you're getting into these kinds of questions, these are questions that they're not trivial questions, right? And so the answers to them, I mean, there are of course some answers that are clearly better than others. But we don't know, right? There's no great textbook of the universe that we can simply check our answers against. And again, this is not a problem just with ethics or just with philosophy. It's everybody's problem. The problem is that there's not some great bell that goes off when we get something right. And so what we have to do is we have to settle, right, for the next best thing. And what we have to do is make progress on these kinds of really important questions. And so when we talk about making progress, it's important to consider what actually counts as progress. In this course, in ethics, progress will have a couple of different features. One of the first things that will count as progress is more fully understanding the options for answers. Right? That actually is progress. If you start off with just this open-ended question where all you got is a question, if you can outline some promising ways of going about answering that question, you're now in a better place than you were before, right? And that's one of the tasks that philosophers in general take upon themselves when they deal with these just mind-busting questions that they deal with, is that they try and more fully understand what options there even are for answers, right? And that's a big part of the task, is just saying, okay, what could we even say? How could we even answer these questions? What even counts as an answer? That is absolutely progress, right? The questions don't vanish, they don't just get answered and forgotten about, but it's definitely progress. One of the other ways we make progress is by then testing our answers, right? We can outline all these possible answers, and some people will select some of them and say, all right, let's take a real close look at this potential answer to the question. And what we do is we test these potential answers, and we usually test them destructively. That is, we see how much abuse they can take, right? We see how much criticism they can stand up to, like real, legitimate criticism. Okay, and this is something that if you attend, say, a philosophy conference, for example, what'll happen is somebody will stand up and they'll spend 30, 40 minutes describing, the problem, describing their approach to the problem, detailing what they're trying to add to the discussion, and it's everybody else's turn once they're done to basically try and tell them what they got wrong or ask questions that serve to, illustrate something that they didn't think about, right? And to somebody seeing this for the first time, it seems very sort of cruel and mean, but you'll notice that nobody's actually angry, right? In fact, most of the time, if somebody raises this really huge problem for somebody, usually they'll say, "Oh, thanks, I didn't think of that." It's a very cordial thing. You don't have to be mean in order to be critical. But that criticism is absolutely necessary. It's absolutely one way that we make progress. And so if we see what kind of criticism our answers, if we see what our answers can really stand up to, that will lead to eliminating some of them. We'll find that some of our answers really can't stand up to very much criticism, or that there's a particular problem with some of these answers that mean they're probably not the best answer. We can get rid of them. So eliminating some answers is progress toward answering some of these kinds of questions. But largely what we do is we simply become more or less confident in certain answers. We're never done. We never just simply, there are very few things we give up entirely on, and there are very few things we just simply accept completely. Rather, we sort of get more versus less confident. And if that sort of nuance bothers you, well, you're going to have a very long life, in the sense that you better get used to it. If uncertainty bothers you, again, prepare for a very unpleasant life, because again, this isn't just philosophy's problem or ethics' problem. It's just a problem. So again, these are some of the things that really do count as progress, and so these are some of the things we're going to be focusing on. So in this particular course that is dealing with ethics, that is questions of right and wrong, questions of conduct and character, there are two big barriers to being successful in this course that I've identified over my many years teaching this subject. That is, there are two kinds of ideas that you've got to simply get rid of before you can really hope to get on to the right track. Okay. And these are, first off, the fact-opinion distinction. This goes, probably back to your elementary school days. We'll talk a little bit more about each of these as we go. The other is called the argument from disagreement, and it's just a simple but easy. It's an easy confusion to make, but it is a confusion. So let's take a look at each of these things in turn, starting with the fact-opinion distinction. So in American schools, it's very common, as I've written here, to teach that there are statements of fact, which are true, right? And then statements of opinion, which are something that somebody thinks, okay? If this sounds familiar, it's because you probably learned it in school. I certainly did, so it's been around at least as long as I've, gone back, and that's been a really long time. And so crucial to this teaching, this idea is that number one, facts and opinions do not overlap, right? If you remember the worksheets, they had, you identify these things are facts, these things are opinions. They never said both, right? So that's part of the way that this gets taught, is that there's no overlap between these two things. And number two is that any statement of value, that is, anytime you see something that somebody says good, bad, ugly, beautiful, fair, unfair, right, wrong, etc. Anything evaluative, right? That's all opinion. That all goes in the opinion bucket. And so that means it can't be a fact. And so we just ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist or something like that. That's how this kind of teaching works. And it's it's horribly destructive for a lot of things, but for the study of ethics in particular. So let me explain what's wrong with this basic idea, and I want to try and explain what's wrong with it by first explaining where it came from, how we got to something that was sort of this wrong. So let's go back and think about that. The original purpose, and this is this is my sort of theory about this, and it seems to fit all the facts that I can find about how this happened. The original purpose of making a distinction between fact and opinion when you look at various sentences is to teach students the difference between news content and opinion content in a newspaper or on TV or on the radio. All right, that's the original purpose of this sort of fact-opinion distinction, is to distinguish between news content and opinion content. And the idea is that it's very common journalistic practice, with journalistic professional ethics, to do two separate things and to keep those things separate. One of those things is reporting. That is one function that journalists serve. And so when they are reporting news content, their statements should be of a neutrally factual nature. Right, which really fits the kind of questions you get on the worksheets, right? When they're just sort of neutrally, factually stated, then that's the kind of thing you would expect to see in news content, that is, in reporting. But another function that journalists have is to what they call editorializing, that is, evaluating, right? Supplying a kind of opinion about the news, about current events, about what's going on. And so when journalists or others are editorializing, their statements are very often evaluative. They say things about what's good or bad or fair or unfair, just, unjust, beautiful, ugly, etc. Okay, they evaluate things. And so again, that matches up the section of the worksheets where you're supposed to say, okay, well, that's all opinion. Okay, well, and that's fine as far as it goes. That actually is important to distinguish between reporting and editorializing in the news media. It is important, I say again, for journalists and for the public to keep in mind the different roles that journalists serve. And actually, most newspapers still today clearly label their news content and their opinion content, right? And very often TV news is criticized for failing to do this. But it's also not the case that reporting is good and editorializing is bad, okay? It's mixing the two that goes against the proper journalism, or the standard journalistic ethics, or the best practices in journalism, okay? So again, both reporting and editorializing are part of the legitimate function of the press. These are both things that we count on them to do. I mean, presenting facts without any evaluation is rather pointless, and presenting an evaluation in the absence of facts is irresponsible, okay? But keeping these editorializing and reporting functions of the press separate does help to keep people from confusing one with the other, right? So again, the original purpose of the fact-opinion distinction is specific to, in the news media, the difference between editorializing and reporting, okay? In fact, here is an example of just that, taken from a couple of days ago from just the front page of the Washington Post. It's a national newspaper. So if you look on the left there, you'll see news content, right? And if you look at the way that the article is titled, and you look at the way that things are, they're neutrally factual. Okay, they're about what somebody said or what some group is doing, or etc. These are just saying, here's what's happening, here's why people are saying this, here's what they're saying, etc., etc. Whereas if you look on the right, you'll see it's separated out as a separate column. You'll see that not only is it sort of set apart in its own column, but that column is labeled opinions, okay? And you'll see in every byline, okay, it's labeled opinion, 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 okay? Now, of course, these are all probably pretty interesting things to read, and also probably pretty valuable. However, one of the things that journalists do is they separate editorializing from reporting. On the left we have reporting, and on the right we have editorializing. Okay, and again, the things are clearly labeled. Newspapers generally do this. TV news ought to do a better job of doing it. But that's the origin of the whole fact-opinion thing. Unfortunately, it's gone off and become its own crazy monster, applying itself to all kinds of things outside of just this very specific thing about news media. So what's happening is that students and teachers are now applying this fact-opinion distinction outside of the news context, and they're sort of adding the following baggage to it. That is, what's getting introduced are a couple of these ideas. Number one, the idea that because facts and opinions are in different categories, that means that opinions are not the kinds of things that can be true. Okay, that's one implication, right? You would say, because if you're separating these statements, you've got fact statements, you've got opinion statements. The fact statements, those can be true. The opinion statements, those can't be true, right? They can be neither true nor false in some sense. They're just opinions. You just put them in another bucket and shut your brain off about them. Okay, that's what's going on. And because evaluations are all going to be stuck in that opinion bucket, that means evaluations, that is things that say stuff about what's good, bad, better, best, fair, unfair, etc. Those things are not the kinds of things that can be true or even false. Okay, they're just in the opinion bucket, right? They just go. So that's what's going on here, and this is the part that's quite absurd and destructive. So let's take a look at this first extra piece of baggage, right? This idea that because facts and opinions are in different categories, then opinions are not the kinds of things that can be true. And this is completely absurd. So consider some counterexamples. First off, consider the statement, "I think Lincoln was president." Okay, so me, the lecturer here, Professor Gillette, I'm the I in the sentence. I think Lincoln was president. All right, so because the sentence has the phrase "I think" in it, okay, the correct thing to do on the worksheets is to call it an opinion, okay? And what that means is, because these things can't overact, it can't be a fact, okay? But now this is getting ridiculous here, because it's actually true that I think that Lincoln was president, right? And what is a fact if not something that is true? And just for the record, I do, in fact, think Lincoln was president. That is a fact about what is in my mind. I do think Lincoln was president. That statement is true. Okay, that statement is a fact. I do think Lincoln was president. And in fact, the sentence that's inside of that one, that Lincoln was president, that's a fact also. So here's the deal. If a newspaper writer had started using the first person for some strange reason, said, "I think this and I think that," then what they're doing is probably writing something that would go in the opinion column of the newspaper. But that's all, right? Again, the original purpose of the fact-opinion distinction is very specific to news coverage. If we try and make it more general than that, it gets ridiculous here in just this way. Consider this other example. Consider like the reverse. So because it's a fact that Lincoln was president, okay, that seems to mean that nobody can think that Lincoln was president, because then that would be an opinion. And opinions and facts are in different categories, right? If it's a fact that Lincoln was president, well, then I can't think that Lincoln was president, because then that would make an opinion, because I think so, right? And that's just, it's completely nuts, okay? And so, in a sense, you just got to do away with it, right? Completely do away with this distinction in any general context, and say, okay, look, what makes something true is whether it actually, describes reality. So if somebody says, "I think Lincoln was president," they have said something true if they really do think Lincoln was president. And if somebody says Lincoln was president, they've said something true if Lincoln was president. That's just how the truth works, and it's not that complicated. Yeah, this is absurd. So let's take a look at the other claim. This idea that because evaluations are all opinions, evaluations are not the kinds of things that can be true. This is actually the one that does the most damage for trying to study something like ethics, or frankly anything, honestly. But ethics is where we run into it pretty hard. So look, first of all, nobody actually believes this, right? People will talk as if they believe this, and they'll sort of respond in this way, but nobody really believes this. So again, a counterexample. Imagine the teacher who taught you the fact-opinion doctrine, and when they say something like, "Look, it's bad to hit people," right? If you're like, if one of your classmates has hit somebody, right? It says, or "It's wrong to cheat on your assignments," right? Just imagine that. And so now imagine telling this teacher, "Oh, well, those are just opinions, so I can safely ignore them." Really? You think that's what they were trying to teach you? Do you think that that's what their intent was? Again, nobody actually believes that opinions can't be true or false, right? I think when someone says it's bad to hit people, they actually think that's true. Or when they say it's wrong to cheat on your assignments, they actually think that's true, right? They think these are facts, and they treat them as facts, okay? And that's because they are. Okay, so continue. In fact, if you think about literally everything, in everything, everyone does all the time, everybody is committed to the idea that some things are better than others. Okay, and they want to choose the better things and avoid the worse things. Okay, the alternative is absolute madness. Okay, imagine a world in which it really couldn't be true whether some things were better than others. I mean, it wouldn't matter what you did at all, right? It's like, yeah, drop the hammer on your foot or don't, doesn't matter, right? One of those things isn't bad, it's completely nuts. So just put it out of your mind, right? It's just forget it. Forget this whole that's just an opinion business. No. If you see something about good, bad, better, best, fair, unfair, these are all statements that can absolutely be true and they can absolutely be false. And everybody behaves that way. So just to try and build up the idea that evaluations, that is, these evaluative claims can be the sorts of things that are true or can be false, let's take a look at some that really are just uncontroversially true, and then, of course, the denial of them would be false. Blue is the best color for the water on a map. Okay, if you want to put this one to the test sometime, go make a map. Go to the internet where you can color in maps, and get a map of some particular thing and color all the water pink. And color everything else some other random color and say, hey, what's this to people? And they're like, I don't know what that is, right? Or if they do sort of recognize the landforms or something, they'll say, well, it kind of looks like a map of North America, but the water's pink. Why is the water pink, right? They're gonna have a problem with that because, again, blue really is the best color for the water on a map. Likewise, blue is a very bad color for desert camouflage. The whole point of camouflage is to blend in. Not a whole lot of blue in the desert. So yeah, blue is a pretty bad color for desert camouflage. Michael Jordan was a good basketball player, right? Some people consider him the best ever, right? And to be the best ever or even be in consideration for it, you got to be pretty good. So yeah, I mean, under any reasonable definition of good, right? Michael Jordan was a good basketball player. Uncontroversially true. It's unfair to treat people badly because of their race. Right? Notice this is a thing we've changed our minds about over a long period of time. But the reason we changed our mind is because we used to be wrong. That's again, the arguments for this one are so good and so basic that it's pretty hard to deny them. So yeah, it really is unfair to treat people badly because of their race. And of course, this one, people say this, but they usually get it wrong when they do. They say everyone has a right to an opinion, right? Well, that's true, but notice what that is. That's a universal moral claim, right? People can't have rights if the whole concept of right and wrong is simply an opinion, right? Having rights means that it is good to treat people in certain ways and bad to treat them in others, and good for everyone to treat people in those ways and bad for everyone to treat anyone in those others, okay? That's the whole concept of rights requires a kind of universality to it. And so, again, notice the statement everyone has a right to an opinion does not mean that everyone's opinion is right. Okay. All right, so these are a lot of statements that, again, these are all evaluative statements, and yet they're clearly the kinds of statements that can be true or can be false. In fact, these ones are true. And so the second big idea then that tends to get in our way right from the get-go is this idea of the argument from disagreement. Once you start to find lots of statements where, oh boy, they don't seem so clear as that blue is a bad color for desert camouflage, you get a lot of things that are arguable. Okay, and so the right thing to do in those cases is to argue about them. That's how we do it. And so consider some of the statements that we're going to be concerned with in this course. Something like, the only intrinsic good is pleasure, or the life of virtue is the best life for a human, or consequences are all that matter to morality, or perhaps no good moral theory should ever require an injustice. All right, so again, these are all evaluative claims. Well, some of them are evaluative and some of them just sort of touch on some kind of an evaluation, but they're all either true or false. And they're all going to be questions that we're going to be arguing about to some extent, really examining whether they are true or false. And so it's tempting to say that these kinds of statements, the statements above here, are neither true nor false because people have simply always disagreed about them and probably always will. Okay, so if you're making that move in your head, saying, well, look, I mean, everyone's disagreed about this for centuries and probably always will disagree, right? There's no way we're all going to agree about some particular claim. And if you think that that means that the claim is really neither true nor false, then you're making this move that's called the argument from disagreement. Okay, so here's how that goes. The argument from disagreement goes, step one, people have always disagreed or perhaps will always disagree about X, okay? And then where that goes is, therefore, X can be neither true nor false, okay? So again, there's a certain sense in which this seems to make sense until you think about it a little bit more carefully. And so consider just a very simple counterexample. So consider the idea that people have always disagreed about whether there is life on Mars. Right? Some people have thought there was, some people have thought there couldn't be, right? That there isn't. And the argument from disagreement would say, therefore, it can be neither true nor false that there is life on Mars. Well, that sounds absurd, and the reason it sounds absurd is because it is absurd. Either there's life on Mars or there isn't, right? Either there was or there wasn't. Okay, one of those things is true, which means that the other is false. If there is or was life on Mars, then it's false that there wasn't or isn't, right? And if there isn't life on Mars, you know, then it's false that there is. Okay. But again, one of those things is the case. Either there is life or there isn't, or there was or there wasn't, right? That's, something has to actually be true here, and our agreement or disagreement has no effect on it whatsoever. Okay, even if everybody said there's never been any life, even if everyone agreed that there's never been life on Mars, that wouldn't mean that there wasn't, right? And if everyone agreed that there was, that wouldn't mean that there was. Okay, and so that's the biggest mistake that is made by this particular pattern of thought that we call the argument from disagreement. Again, to put that in formal terms, the main trouble with the argument from disagreement is that it confuses truth with agreement, and these are just different things. A thing can be true even if everybody agrees that it is false, and and the other way around. Something can be false even if everyone agrees that it's true. And so again, agreement or disagreement is irrelevant to truth. Right? The truth is about the way things actually are. Okay. Agreement is about the way people think things are. And those are just two different things. One of them is mind independent. It's a fact about the universe. The other is a fact about us, about what people think. And there's no necessary connection between them. And so here's how we shall proceed. So if you ditch the whole fact opinion thing and completely treat evaluative claims, that is claims about good, bad, fair, unfair, right, wrong, etc., as claims that are either true or false, and you're trying to figure out which, then that's the way you have to proceed. You have to think that way, otherwise you're gonna be lost from the get-go. And so here's how we'll proceed on these kinds of things. Okay, so consider again some of these statements that we'll be concerned with in the course. This is the list from a few slides ago. The only intrinsic good is pleasure, the life of virtue is the best, consequences are all that matter. Again, we're going to be concerned with a great many statements in this course. This is just a small sampling of those. The way that we're going to make progress is that we're going to think about what is good about each of these ideas, right? About the kind of evidence we have in favor of the truth of some of these ideas. And we're going to think about what is bad about each of these ideas. That is, what evidence we have for the falsehood of these various kinds of claims. And we want to compare those two things to each other to see which is stronger. We want to determine if the good things about these ideas are good enough that we should just accept the idea, or if the bad things about these ideas are bad enough that we have to simply reject that idea, or if it's just not clear. Right? And again, this is if you remember a few slides ago when we talked about progress, right? Part of progress is simply understanding our options, okay? And understanding which options are good in which ways and which options are bad in other ways. Being able just to be aware of those things, that counts as progress on questions that are this difficult. Okay? And so again, we'll see some examples of each of these things. We'll see some examples of ideas that are so good that we're probably simply going to accept that they're true. Some ideas that are so bad that we're going to have to simply reject them, and plenty of ideas where it's not clear whether the idea is true ultimately or false ultimately, but at least we have a pretty good idea of the kinds of things that are good about that idea and some of the things that are bad about that idea. And in fact, our task is going to be a lot easier than that. We're not going to have to come up with from scratch all of the things that are good or bad about these really hard questions. In fact, humanity has had at least a couple thousand years of a head start on us. Ethics in the Western tradition goes back, about as far back as Plato and Aristotle, which is about 2,500 years ago from the present. And so, again, lots of really brilliant people have had lots of really great things to say about these kinds of questions, and we'd be foolish if we didn't use all of that progress and use all of that information. And so because this is an introductory level course in ethics, we're mostly going to be geared toward catching you up on the progress that we have already made on these kinds of questions. There's certainly some room for original thought, but largely what you want to do is you want to avoid wasting energy and going down blind alleys, and you want to start, you want to get on the same page as the rest of us, so we can then progress from there. Right? It's like climbing a ladder, right? You want to get up to the top so that you can keep climbing. Right? And so that brings me to a few remarks about how evaluation works in a course like this one. You might think, well, gosh, if stuff that's like if right or wrong is just like an opinion, then how do we get evaluated? Well, we must just get evaluated for expressing our opinions. Well, no, I can't imagine how such a course would ever be evaluated, and so it's not going to work that way. Partially that's because morality simply isn't just a matter of opinion. And so again, some questions are not on assignments of any kind, quizzes, tests, etc., because I don't know the answer to them, right? And neither does anybody else. So questions like, is utilitarianism the best moral theory? Well, I don't know, right? I have some ideas about how that question is best answered, in terms of laying out the options for answering that question, but I don't ultimately know the answer to that question. Is abortion morally permissible? Again, there's a discussion, right? There are good arguments and there are some arguments that aren't very good, but ultimately, I don't know the answer to that question, neither does anybody else. The question, is pleasure the only intrinsic good? We'll be talking about that in connection with a view called hedonism. And again, I don't know the answer to that question, so I'm not going to ask anybody the answer to that question, because I couldn't possibly grade the answer to that question. Instead, I'm going to ask things that I can grade because there are actually correct and incorrect answers about them. So as I put it here, some questions have actually a fairly narrow range of correct response, so they make pretty good assignment questions. So for example, how does the utilitarian moral theory work? That has a very definite answer. Right? There's a very narrow range of ways you can answer that question and still be saying something true about how utilitarianism works as a moral theory. I might ask about what is Don Marquis's argument for the moral impermissibility of abortion? Well, that's again a quite factual question, and it's a question I definitely know the answer to, and so it makes and after doing the various assignments, so should you, and so that makes it a good question. What is good about hedonism and what is bad about it? Again, there's a fairly narrow range of good answers to those questions, and we're going to be covering that in the course content. So that's what we're going to be geared toward, and so rest assured, right, that you're going to be asked questions that really do actually have right and wrong answers, and that the course material makes very clear which are the right and wrong answers to those questions, right? So in that sense, it's like any other course, right? You pay good attention to the course material, and you'll do fine. One thing about this course is that it requires you to recognize ideas, okay, which is it can be difficult, but it's pretty important. And being in higher education, it's a college level course. It's about the level at which you're going to be asked to recognize ideas pretty often. All right, and so in summary, you should take away some sort of very basic ideas about this particular set of preliminary ideas. The first of these is that through the course, we're going to be examining questions of metaethics, of normative ethics, and of applied ethics. Right? You should have some idea of what the difference between those things are. It helps to understand the organization of the course. You've got to discard the whole fact-opinion distinction. As much as you might have an instinct to see a claim about morality and think, well, that's just somebody's opinion. Just ditch that, okay? Statements about morality are either true or they're not. Okay, and that's all there's. What we're going to try and do is we're going to try and examine, right, strategies for trying to answer these questions, trying to determine what kinds of things about morality are true and which things about morality are false. Okay. But yeah, the whole fact-opinion doctrine, if you're applying it outside of the whole, outside of a newspaper, it's a meaningless distinction that's harmful and even absurd. And then finally, think about this notion of disagreement. Look, whether anyone or everyone agrees or disagrees is again going to be irrelevant to the truth or falsity of a claim. That is, the argument from disagreement is a bad intellectual move. It's not obviously a bad intellectual move until you think about it, and then it's pretty obvious. It's pretty bad once you start seeing the right counterexamples. So again, these are the upshots of this particular set of ideas. If you want to go back and take a look at any of these things again, it's recorded. That's one of the great benefits of recordings, is you can take a look at it however many times you want. And of course, I would very strongly recommend that if you have questions about any little piece of this, even very broad questions, even questions where you're like, oh, I'm not even sure how to phrase it, phrase a question the wrong way and then correct yourself later, right? It's much better than simply not asking a question. And so ask questions in the discussion area, and you'll get answers, right? You'll be able to better think about some of these kinds of issues here. But this is some preliminary matter, and so I hope you are a little bit more well prepared to really embark on the study of ethics, because it's really fantastic and really important.